Have you ever had that strange feeling that you're being watched, even when you're sure you're alone? You know that feeling when your neck tingles, your heart races for no reason, and you find yourself looking behind you just to make sure no one's there. Well, yeah. Since I moved into this building, I've lived with this every day. I never paid attention to my neighbors. I've always kept to myself, focused on my own life. A hurried good night in the elevator, a quick wave in the parking lot, and nothing more. To me, neighbors are just nameless faces, shadows that cross our path and disappear shortly after. But here, in this building, there's something different. At the end of the hallway, there's a door that never opens. I've never heard voices, never seen anyone coming or going, not a single footstep inside, just silence. But what really bothers me isn't the silence. It's the feeling that every time I pass by, someone is watching me from behind that wood. Have you ever lived in a place like this? A space where the silence is so heavy it seems to hide secrets? I try to convince myself. It's all in my head. After all, who would waste time observing me? But the body doesn't lie. My heart races every time I approach that door. I remember one night in particular. The hallway light flickered incessantly, casting elongated shadows across the walls. I was carrying a heavy bag, and the closer I got to the mysterious door, the more I felt that shiver run down my spine. Then I heard a subtle sound, the slow creak of a hinge. You know, that unmistakable sound of an old door moving. I glanced quickly, but saw only a tiny crack, enough to freeze me. And here's a question. What would you do if you noticed a door opening by itself in your home? Would you run? Would you pretend you didn't see it? Or would you stand still, waiting for something to appear on the other side? I just followed, pretending not to notice, but ever since that night, I haven't been able to walk down that hallway without feeling eyes fixed on me. At first, I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe someone really lived there and I'd never noticed their routine. But if so, why never a sound? Why never a light? Why never a simple hello? No. There was something wrong, something that didn't make sense. Have you ever had a strange neighbor, the kind of person who always seems to know more about you than they should? Well, in my case, this neighbor never even showed his face, never opened the door, never said a word. And precisely because of that, he became even more disturbing. I never paid attention to my neighbors. But this one was different. This one seemed to exist solely to watch me. Always present, even though it never appeared. And the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the feeling became that I was being watched with every step, every movement, every breath. What if I told you that since then my life has never been the same? That every night I pass by that door feeling that something or someone is waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Now I ask you, would you have the courage to cross this corridor alone in the middle of the night, knowing that there might be someone on the other side standing in the darkness just watching? If that already makes you uncomfortable, imagine what happens when the door finally opens. Want to find out? Then subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next episodes. Because the story of the silent neighbor is just beginning. When I moved into this apartment, I was simply looking for peace. Nothing luxurious. 2 simple rooms, a narrow kitchen, a bedroom small enough to fit only the bed and a closet. For me, it was perfect. After months of instability, I just wanted silence, routine, a place to call my own. And in a way, I found it. But there was one detail that bothered me from day one: the hallway. Not that it was any different from the hallways of any old building. Worn flooring, peeling walls in spots, dim, yellowed lamps that cast more shadow than light. But at the end of it, there was something that seemed out of place. A door, always closed. And you might think, okay, so what? Closed doors exist everywhere. But the strange thing was the absence of life. I never heard footsteps behind that door, never smelled food coming from inside, never heard the muffled sound of a television on. Nothing. It was as if no one lived there. Yet, every time I passed by it, I had the uneasy feeling that I was being watched. Have you ever felt that? That invisible pressure, as if eyes were following you even when no one was around. It's the kind of thing we try to ignore, but it grows inside our minds like an echo. For the first few days I tried to laugh it off. It's just paranoia, I'd repeat under my breath, carrying my shopping bags down the hallway, but the feeling wouldn't go away. And each time I crossed that silent space, the tightness in my chest grew stronger. It was as if the air grew heavier the closer I got to that door. One night, coming home from work, I noticed something strange. The hallway light flickered as usual, but in that rapid oscillation of light and dark, I swear I saw movement. The shadow of someone behind the crack in the door. I stopped, looked again, and sure enough, there was nothing. Just the closed door, motionless as always. But what if I had actually seen something? The mind plays tricks, yes, but was that all it was? The next day, I decided to take a closer look. As I passed, I slowed down, as if searching for something that shouldn't be there. It was then that I noticed the bottom crack of the door was a little larger than the others in the building. And when I bent down just out of curiosity, I felt my entire body freeze, because I had the distinct impression that there was something on the other side, motionless, staring at me. I didn't see it clearly, but you know when you feel it. The silence was so dense it seemed to contain a pent-up breath. From then on, I started timing myself. I'd come home at different times just to see if I could catch my neighbor in the act. But nothing. He never opened the door, never left, never came in. He simply didn't exist. At least, not in a way I could prove. And that made me even more disturbed. Because think about it, how can someone live in a place without ever leaving, without ever making a sound, without ever turning on a light? In the second week, something worse happened. I was walking down the hallway late one night, almost midnight, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a doorknob being slowly turned. Frozen, I turned my head to the door at the end of the hall, and there it was. Ajar, just a foot, but enough to let out utter darkness within. My instinct was to quicken my pace like a child fleeing the darkness of their room. I went inside, locked the door twice, and stood in silence, listening for any movement in the hallway. Nothing, just the distant sound of rain tapping on the window. And that's when the doubt really gnawed at me. Could that apartment really be empty? What if it wasn't? What if someone really was there, living in the shadows, never showing their face? Would you dare to face that door? To approach it, put your ear to it, and try to find out if there's anyone on the other side? Because I didn't. I just kept living day after day, knowing that behind that worn wood, there were invisible eyes, always fixed on me. The nights began to grow heavier and heavier. I tried to ignore them, but it was impossible to ignore. Every time silence fell over the building, that disturbing sound emerged. The slow, dragging creak of a door moving somewhere in the hallway. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Have you ever heard the sound of an old door being slowly opened? It's almost like a metallic groan, a warning that someone is there, even if they don't want to be seen. At first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was the wind blowing through a poorly closed window. Maybe it was just the building's aging structure. But what about when the same sound happens, always at the same time, always coming from the same place? Is it still a coincidence? I started noticing. Every time between 2 and 3 in the morning, when the whole world seemed asleep, I would wake to the same noise. The quiet click of the doorknob, followed by the creak of the door opening a few inches. Never more than that. Just enough to let me know something was moving outside. And when I worked up the courage to open my own door and look, the hallway was empty. Too empty. Just the damp smell of the walls and the distant echo of my footsteps. But at the end, the neighbor's door always looked a little different. The crack, always a crack open, as if someone had just peeked in and returned to the darkness. Have you ever had that feeling? That something doesn't add up, but you can't prove it. It's like living a waking nightmare. The more I tried to ignore it, the more the details haunted me. It was a Friday night when the situation went from uncomfortable to unbearable. I arrived tired, my hands full of bags, and as I crossed the hallway, I dropped my keys on the floor. The metallic sound echoed dry in the absolute silence. I bent down to pick them up, and that's when I saw them. There, through the crack at the bottom of the door, was an eye. It wasn't a shadow, it wasn't a reflection, it wasn't imagination. It was a human eye still fixed on me, as if waiting for just that moment to be noticed. Can you imagine the feeling? The butterflies in your stomach, the breath caught in your throat, the certainty that someone was on the other side, watching every detail. For a moment, I couldn't move. I was hunched over, almost kneeling on the floor, staring into that unmoving gaze. It was like looking at a wild animal lurking, ready to spring, but enjoying prolonging the tension. My fingers trembled as I touched the keys. I felt my heart pound so loudly it seemed to echo throughout the hallway. Then, slowly, as if it knew I was petrified, the door began to close. A soft creak cut through the silence, and that eye disappeared behind the wood. The sharp click of the lock sounded like thunder in my head. And tell me, what would you do? Would you dare run to the door and throw it open? Would you dare ask who's there staring at you in the middle of the night? Or would you do like me? Simply grab my keys, get up quickly, and enter my apartment, locking the door twice as if that were enough to protect me. That night I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, all I could think about was that eye. Who was there? Why did it never show up? Why did it never say anything? And most of all, what did it want from me? I no longer knew what was worse, the absolute silence of the hallway or the certainty that behind that door there was someone awake, waiting for the right moment to look at me again. It was dawn when I woke to a sound that left no room for doubt. Footsteps, heavy, slow, shuffling. They weren't the quick steps of someone in a hurry, nor the light steps of a child. They were measured, as if the person had all the time in the world. The hallway was alive, even though I couldn't see who was walking outside. Have you ever woken up with the feeling that you're not alone? That there's something or someone outside your room just waiting for you to move? The silence between each footstep felt calculated, as if the thing outside knew I was listening. I stood up slowly, each movement accompanied by the rapid sound of my own breathing. I approached the door, hesitating before placing my eye against the peephole. And what I saw made my entire body freeze. The hallway was empty, completely empty, no shadows, no movement. But at the end, the neighbor's door was ajar. A black crack, open enough to reveal nothing but absolute darkness. Can you imagine? Knowing there's something behind that door, but all you can see is a black hole that seems to swallow you whole? I knew I shouldn't keep looking, but I couldn't look away. The entire hallway seemed stuck in that frozen scene. My door closed, the hallway deserted, and the neighbor's door opened like a dark mouth, waiting. It was then that I noticed another detail. Right in front of my door, on the floor, was something that hadn't been there before. A small folded piece of paper. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but curiosity mixed with dread got the better of me. I opened the door slowly, praying I wouldn't hear any sounds coming from the end of the hallway, and reached out my hand. I picked up the paper. It was cold, almost damp, as if it had been left there recently. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the sheet, and in that instant I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, as if written in a hurry, or by someone with unsteady hands. And the message was short, just one sentence, but enough to steal my breath. I like watching you while you sleep. Tell me, how would you react if you found a note like that on your doorstep? Would you dare to believe it was just a joke? Or would you accept the fact that while you rest, someone spends the entire night staring at you? My mind filled with horrific images. I imagined myself sleeping, tossing and turning in bed, while someone peered through the doorway watching my every movement. I thought of every time I woke in the middle of the night, feeling an inexplicable chill. I thought of every strange dream I'd had since moving in. What if they weren't dreams? What if they were confused memories of times when I'd actually been watched? I clutched the note to my chest as if it were concrete proof that I wasn't crazy. Except the worst part was still ahead of me. I slowly raised my gaze to the end of the hallway. The neighbor's door was now closed again. Closed as if it had never moved. Closed as if it mocked my sanity. So, what would you do in my shoes? Would you go back inside and pretend nothing happened? Would you call the police, even though you had nothing but a piece of paper? Or would you let yourself be consumed by doubt, knowing that while you sleep, someone might be there, standing in the darkness, watching? The next morning, with the note still tucked away in my pocket, I decided I could no longer bear the weight of it alone. My dark circles betrayed the sleepless night, and my eyes burned from thinking about what had happened. I needed answers. No matter how absurd it might seem, I needed to confront someone about the neighbor who never left his house. I went to the building's management office. The building manager, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, greeted me behind a desk covered in papers. I trembled as I spoke, trying to organize my words, but desperation filled my voice. The apartment down the hall, the neighbor, he's watching me. He left this on my doorstep. I held out the note, the phrase still etched in my mind like fire. I like to watch you while you sleep. The building manager took the paper, read it slowly, and then looked up at me. His expression wasn't one of surprise. It was one of discomfort, as if he already knew something I didn't yet. "Are you sure it was from there?" he asked, his voice low, almost reluctant. "Absolutely," I replied firmly. "I saw the door ajar. I saw someone. Someone is living there." The silence stretched longer than it should have, until, with a heavy sigh, the building manager took an antique keychain from the drawer. The keys jingled in his hand, echoing through the empty hallway as we walked together toward the door. And here I ask, would you have the courage to accompany someone to the source of their fear? To stand before the door that haunts your nights and finally walk through it? Or would you prefer to remain in doubt, believing that sometimes ignorance is safer? When we arrived, the hallway seemed quieter than ever. Each footstep echoed on the floor, as if we were desecrating a space that didn't want to be disturbed. The building manager inserted the key into the lock, hesitated for a moment, and then turned it. The sharp click echoed through the heavy air. The door opened slowly, revealing not a home, but an absolute void. The smell of mold and dust filled the nostrils. The floor was covered in accumulated dirt. Cobwebs crept into the corners, and the walls were peeling, marked by time. There was no furniture, no clothing, nothing to indicate anyone had lived there. It was like entering an abandoned tomb. And it was at that moment that the truth fell upon me like a crushing weight. The building manager spoke with disturbing calm. "This apartment is empty. No one lives here. It's been unoccupied for over 10 years. Can you imagine the shock? I'd spent weeks feeling eyes following me, hearing creaks, receiving notes, weeks believing there was someone behind that door, following my every step. And now, before my eyes, all there was darkness and abandonment. But if the apartment had been empty for a decade, who was watching me? Who opened the door? Who left that note on my doorstep?" I looked around, trying to find some sign that might explain it. Then I noticed something in the corner of the room, a pile of crumpled papers, damp with age. I approached, my heart hammering in my chest, and picked up a few of them. The sentences were all similar, written in the same shaky handwriting. "I know you saw me. Today I'm going in. You shouldn't sleep with your back to the door." Dozens of notes, maybe hundreds, as if someone had repeated the same ritual night after night for years. And I ask you, would you believe the building manager? Or would you believe your own eyes? Is it possible that an empty apartment hides something that shouldn't be there? Or worse, is it possible that it was never attached to the apartment, but to me? In that instant, I realized the question I'd been asking all along was wrong. It wasn't who's the neighbor down the hall. The real question was, what if he'd never left? After that day, nothing went back to normal. The building manager's explanation didn't convince me. An apartment empty for 10 years doesn't leave footprints in the hallway. It doesn't leave a door creaking at the same time every morning. It doesn't leave handwritten notes freshly placed on my door. I returned to my apartment with a heavy heart, but an even greater certainty. I was not alone on that floor. The presence was real, invisible, but real. Over the next few nights, I tried to ignore it. I closed the curtains, turned off the lights early, and put on headphones to block out the noise. But it was no use. You can try to cover your ears, but you can't silence your body. The chills returned. Every time I walked down the hallway, the same invisible pressure crushed my chest, as if a pair of eyes were following me from start to finish. And then came the sounds, the creak. Always the same creak. A door slowly opening, ancient hinges groaning, wood scraping against the frame. At first I pretended not to hear it, but it's impossible to ignore when the sound echoes inside your head as if it were happening beside your bed. Some nights I woke up with the distinct feeling that someone was standing outside. The silence was absolute, but it was as if the air was too heavy, too charged. Have you ever woken up with the certainty that someone was watching you, even though you couldn't see anything? It's a kind of fear that doesn't need proof because it's already settled inside you. I don't look through the peephole anymore. I can't. I'm afraid of what I'll see, afraid of what I'll confirm. But even without looking, I know there's something there. I know there's someone. When I close my eyes to try to sleep, I feel the same motionless presence on the other side of the door, leaning against it, waiting. And the worst part is, every now and then, I hear that dull click. The wood snapping back into place, the door slowly closing. No matter what the building manager said, no matter how long the apartment had been empty, the door never stopped moving. And here I ask, could you live knowing that someone is watching every detail of your life? That while you dream, there is something standing in the darkness, breathing, just waiting. Sometimes in the wee hours of the morning when the whole house is plunged into silence, I feel like the crack in the door opens a little wider, as if invisible eyes are trying to confirm if I'm still there. And no matter how much I try to convince myself it's paranoia, fear always wins, because the gaze remains, always in the gap, always attentive, always waiting for the right moment. And to this day, the sound that makes me shiver the most isn't the wind, the rain, or any ordinary nighttime noise. It's that slow, drawn-out creak that announces the door has opened again. So, before you go to sleep, I have a question for you. Are you sure no one is watching through the crack in your door right now? If this story gave you chills, just imagine what's yet to come. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future stories. Turn on the notification bell, sir, and be prepared, because with each new video, someone might be watching you too.